Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
We've made it past Labor Day weekend, and that means fall colors in some parts of the country aren't too far off, seasonal wildlife migrations are getting underway, and summertime crowds in the national park system have thinned out. This is Kurt Repanshek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. Fall is a glorious time to be out in the park system. The question today, though, is how will the park system be functioning come October? That's a very pertinent question because the federal government is facing a shutdown on September 30th if Congress can't come to terms on a budget for fiscal year 2026, which starts October 1st. To consider the possible options, Kristen Brengel, the Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs for the National Parks Conservation Association, is joining me today. We'll be back in a minute to bring you up to date.
Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Kurt. How you doing?
I'm doing well. And I'm glad I'm not funded by the federal government because, as you well know, there are 3 weeks until the end of the fiscal year. And everybody is wondering what's going to happen on September 30th. Will the government shut down? Will Congress come up with a continuing resolution? Will somehow a miracle arise and they come up with a funding package that everybody can agree on? What's your gut sense?
My gut sense is that there is no plan right now and that there is going to be a decision on how long a continuing resolution will be. And there's a desire to pass appropriations bills. And so my hope is that the Senate is able to pass their interior appropriations bill, which would give the Park Service flat funding, which is pretty much the best we're going to hope for right now. But they also have some great language in the Senate interior bill to retain park staff, rehire folks, cut out the nonsense with canceling leases in parks, and make sure that any reduction in force has to actually go through Congress. So the Senate was bolder than the House was, and has bipartisan support. So we're hoping the Senate bill actually moves in the next couple of weeks.
Any insights? Will the House accept it?
You know, everything is a negotiation back here, and it's hard to know what people are willing to give on particular issues, but the chairman of the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee on the House side is Representative Simpson from Idaho. He's really good on park issues, and if he has a say, we feel like we can get to a good negotiation on the bill.
Well, that's good to hear. Of course, flat funding, I mean, how many years have we been working on flat funding now?
That's awful. And it is ridiculous that we're in the situation where everyone knows the billions of dollars of deferred maintenance the Park Service has. Folks are very aware that staffing levels have gone down considerably since about 2012. And everyone is fully aware of this, and they also know that visitors are continuing to come to the parks in droves. And so the parks couldn't be more popular than they are right now. And we are not funding them well and staffing them well. And Congress is fully aware of all of these things. And we're disappointed that we have to live with flat funding. But what we don't want to live with, Kurt, is the president's budget, which would cut the Park Service operations budget by a third. So if we have to live with flat funding for another year, we take it and live to fight another day.
But I'm just wondering, the president's fiscal 25 budget was not accepted. President Biden's fiscal 25 budget was not accepted. And so they're operating on 24 funding, is that correct?
Correct.
So I believe in President Biden's proposed budget, he had funding for Amache National Historic Site in Colorado. So that funding didn't come through, so you've got units like Amache that are out there, but they don't have any funding. Is that correct?
I'd have to look into that to see if Amache, because what happens with the operations budget, remember, is that the regions distribute the money. It's basically one giant line item, and the regions dispense the money to the different park units. So I'd have to clarify that and look and see if Amache got any money. But they're still trying to get up and running, and I know that they were working on a plan.
Right, right.
So clearly some money went toward Amache because they were working on the plan and the foundation document. So I don't think they're quite at zero, but we'd have to look into that.
Yeah, according to the Green Book, the request for Amache was $120,000, basically one person. So based on what you're saying about the regional office, I guess they could have cobbled together $120,000 from other park units.
Or other funds, yeah. I mean, it's just the basic part of budgeting is that you shift money. And so if there's, and you know, the good thing is that Amache's in the Intermountain region, and so with a lot of big parks that get fee money. And so there may be some opportunities to negotiate to get it some money.
I'd just be curious how many other park units are in that type of situation, whether it's, you know, a new unit or a unit that really desperately needed money that President Biden was willing to provide that didn't get funded.
Yeah, I think we'll watch that carefully. But luckily, because of the way that the budget process works for the Park Service, you can shift some money around, and you can also lend staff to park units.
Yeah, a lot of staff to go around there.
There aren't that many staff to go around, but I know there are superintendents of larger parks who've been generous with having staff go help the smaller parks.
Now, the Park Service in recent years has dealt with government shutdowns in different ways. If you go back to the Obama years, when John Jarvis was director of the Park Service, they closed the parks. President Trump, during his first term, kind of straddled the fence in that the parks would stay open, but they weren't fully staffed, and we ran into problems with that. And then during President Biden's term, we're going to say the parks aren't open, but realize that we can't completely keep people out. Mm-hmm. What do you think of those three different approaches? Is one better than another?
There's no shutdowns are the worst. You know, it's anti-park in a way to have a shutdown because you're closing parks, which is not what the National Park System was intended to do. It was intended to have these places open and available for public enjoyment and resource protection. So shutdowns are not conducive to the mission of the Park Service. So the safest approach to take is to close which is what the Obama administration did and previous administrations before that did, that is the only way to ensure that the resources remain protected. And so, we know that for a fact because we've seen during other shutdowns where parks were open, vandalism happened and other problems occurred, and you put people in jeopardy because you don't have search and rescue and you don't have the available staff to help people. So the safest route is closure. And these efforts to try to minimally keep parks open are usually problematic.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that during the COVID pandemic back in 2020. I know Big Bend National Park had a lot of issues with garbage because garbage wasn't being collected. There weren't the normal ranger patrols. There was this one story of this backpacker who broke a leg and basically was tag team carried out of the backcountry. They finally found a ranger who was able to get the guy to a hospital. You had cars shooting past closures. It's not what you want to see in a park system.
No, and we don't want to demonize visitors, but it's even an occasional incident is problematic in an environment where the Park Service has such low staff. So, and even this summer where we knew that some parks were strained, visitors still went out and tried to do extreme sports and went beyond their own physical abilities, and parks had to sort of rally to make sure that visitors were protected. So we know low staffing does not equal a good situation for visitors, whether they're following the laws or not.
No, and low staffing is a problem. It's been a problem since January 20th. And as NPCA has documented, roughly a quarter of the Park Service personnel who were employed on January 19th, 2025 are no longer employed for one reason or another. And that's really forced changes in how parks operate, no?
Correct. And these are permanent staff too. It's 24% of permanent staff are down. So what happened was Secretary Burgum had an order a few months ago where he insisted all parks have to keep facilities open. So what this did was it put an emphasis on visitor services over resource protection. And parks spent the entire summer this year rejiggering their staff and putting more people at visitor centers and putting some people on trails. And what it meant was that, and what we've seen based on some reporting from the New York Times, is even the Grand Canyon, had issues with staffing, doing maintenance, water monitoring for pests, monitoring for viruses and diseases. Zion National Park didn't have a volunteer coordinator, so the 20,000 visitor community service hours that are typically done didn't really happen this summer. So you just have this accumulation of issues that have occurred in the parks over the summer, and because everyone had to shift to visitor services and not resource protection, these impacts will only get worse as time goes on. And when you have scientists cleaning the bathrooms at Yosemite, it means the science isn't getting done, and we don't know what's happening with wildlife, water quality, air quality. So these issues are only going to get worse as time goes on if the administration continues with the hiring freeze. They have consolidated staff and moved them over to DOI, and they continue to talk about a reduction in force. So at this point, there's no end in sight that things are going to get better.
Now, a lot of the parks across the country, though, were established because of Congress.
Most of them.
Congress folks stepped up and said, hey, this is a great place, and I'd love to have a park in my state, in my district. Let's pass this legislation. Is Congress happy with how the Park Service is being managed?
I think what we found through committee hearings is that folks are not happy, and they're questioning the tactics of the current administration. And what we found during the budget hearings when members of Congress were questioning Secretary Burgum is that they don't know that he understands the problems that are going on in parks right now. He seemed to not really have a basic understanding. And there was one exchange between Senator Murray from Washington State and Burgum where she had to explain the value of regional staff. And I think she used snow plowing as an example, that you need the regional office to procure the snow plow in order for the person at Mount Rainier to actually do the plowing. And, Senator Murkowski, who we helped to uncover the fact that 60 staff in the Alaska Regional Office are now gone. She asked Burgum repeatedly for a list of staff in the Alaska parks and the regional office so she can understand the situation and how bad it is out there. So, and she's hearing now from the chart that we got from the Park Service that Denali didn't have any summer camps that they normally do for students in Alaska. It's the situation is bad. Congress is fully aware of it. They've got to put their collective feet down and make sure that the parks are well staffed and that the resources are being protected. Remember that when Congress passes these bills to establish national park units, they usually come with a sort of preamble, if you will, that speaks to the kinds of resources that each park is meant to protect. So it's in law that the parks have to be protected. They are not just there for visitor services. You actually have to protect the very resources people are going to visit.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we've seen from this administration that it doesn't really think it's responsible for following any laws or whatnot. As you well know, there was a ruling from a judge in Florida back in 2023 ordering the Park Service to move forward with the Marine Reserve Plan for Biscayne National Park. Nothing has happened since that ruling was issued, and we're just kind of waiting to see, is somebody going to say, hey, excuse me, Your Honor, but nothing's being done?
Yeah, and in Biscayne, the reef is critically important to the park unit. It's an underwater park, if you will, and its key resource isn't being protected very well. And the whole point of the Marine Reserve was to give the fishery and the coral reef time to repair itself. And so the Park Service, if it's delinquent on its management responsibilities, we should continue to pursue litigation and make them accountable.
If the Trump administration goes back to its playbook from the first term, we had that partial government shutdown in December 2018 that rolled over into 2019, and they operated with a skeleton staff. Some might say that the Park Service already is operating with a skeleton staff because of the losses in personnel. Do you think there's a skeleton staff out there that could manage the parks in a partial government or a total government shutdown?
I think we would continue to urge people to take a step back and maybe rearrange their plans to go into parks. The morale at the Park Service right now is pretty low. And this summer, staff were asked to do 2, 3, 4 jobs. Folks are exhausted. There were people who were doing duty at the visitor center. They were doing custodial duties. They were trying to have some semblance of visitor programming. We have really stretched the current staff very thinly. And now, it's the time of the year where the seasonals have to rotate. And so a lot of those summer seasonals are going away, and it's the fall seasonals. And what we haven't figured out yet with the Park Service is how to deal with the fact that shoulder seasons don't exist anymore. People are still going to the parks in high volume this time of year. You live in Utah. The Utah parks start to ramp up visitation again coming in the fall. It's a great time to go to southern Utah. Leaf peeping in Shenandoah, Acadia. Visitation remains pretty high in many of these park units, and I just tried to book a hotel in Jackson Hole for this week, and it was incredibly hard to do that. People are going to the park still September, October, November in high volumes, and the current staff is already exhausted from the summer. So it's going to be a tough environment if they have to deal with a shutdown and have to go even more bare bones.
This is Kurt Repanshek with the National Parks Traveler. We're talking today with Kristen Brengel, the Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs for the National Parks Conservation Association, about the possibility of a government shutdown at the end of September and what that might mean for the national parks and your enjoyment in the fall in the park system. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. The National Parks Traveler this year has tracked rapid-fire upheaval across the national park system as the Trump administration plies its government shrinking blitz. We'll continue illuminating these dramatic changes for our readers and listeners, but in the coming months, the Traveler also will be taking a deep dive into crucial questions facing the natural world in parks across the country. We'll probe the rainforest's greenery and explore what's at risk in Atlantic Ocean depths. We'll walk across prairie grasses to glimpse what an enormous swath of North America once looked like back when it nourished bison, western meadowlark, big bluestem grasses, and more. Are they relics of the past, or can they rebound? What wildlife have we lost, and what might we lose in the coming decades? If a coral reef dies, what becomes of the vast marine life that relies upon it for survival? Does the loss of one species of pine tree matter? If grizzly bears, birds, and squirrels turn to it for food, it does, right? Over the next 10 months, the Traveler's team will delve into the park system's forests, oceans, and plains in search for answers. In the Florida Reef, we'll dive to gauge the future of staghorn and elkhorn corals. In Haleakala National Park, we'll hike into the tropical forest and arid alpine desert to check on both the silvery-haired silverswords, a plant threatened with extinction, and the honeycreeper bird species, even closer to vanishing. We'll check in on bat species that call Mammoth Cave National Park and Great Smoky Mountains National Park home. We'll search for northern spotted owls and follow efforts to help abalone populations rebound. The stories of species in our national parks are tales of both success and failure, but all are threads in the fabric of the park system. They need to be illuminated to show what species the parks can nurture if they have support, and what will be lost if no one cares. We will bring them to you in words, photographs, videos, and conversations. Our series won't be a one-and-done effort, but a starting point for understanding what's at risk in the natural world around us. We hope you share our interest in these crucial issues and will help support our work with a donation. The Curtis and Edith Munson Foundation has agreed to match your donations dollar for dollar up to $15,000. Your help in reaching this goal is invaluable. Can we count on your support? You can find a donate button on our homepage at nationalparkstraveler.org. For the Traveler, this is Kurt Repanshek. Kristen, before the break, we were talking about the staffing in the national parks. Interior Department officials say everything's fine. In response to the internal documents that the New York Times broke, in which we covered as well, Interior Department said that news organizations were peddling a false narrative that staffing levels and operations at our national parks this summer are on par with previous years. Full stop. I don't like that expression, full stop, but it seems to be vogue in Washington. The bespoke full stop. I don't know. What do you think? Is everything normal in the national parks?
They're not. And I think it is ridiculous to peddle false information, and I don't think anyone believes that Interior Department spokesperson at this point. Many people who went to smaller, mid-sized parks experience fewer staff. We know from the comments being accepted from the QR code, the ridiculous QR code, that people are noticing that even the bigger parks have fewer staff than they have in previous visits. So it's inaccurate to say that the parks aren't feeling impacts. And when Great Sand Dunes has reduced visitor hours, and Carlsbad Caverns has reduced visitor center hours, and Indiana Dunes has fewer ranger-led tours by a huge amount. Custodial and maintenance services are limited. Mowing and snow removal delayed. Harper's Ferry educational programs canceled. Entrance and fee station hours reduced. Maintenance delayed. Restrooms limited. Buffalo National River Visitor Center hours reduced. Ranger-led tours and school programming canceled. You're telling me no one feels those impacts? Many of these parks that I've listed are parks that get a lot of visitation, and a lot of people from in-state visit them. They know what's going on. And so I think the administration just needs to really reconcile the fact that what they've done is highly damaging to the Park Service. They need to really consider the fact that they're making federal work unattractive. And they need to reinforce with Park Service staff and the people who want to make the Park Service a career that they can still do that. And so rather than trying to say that a chart that was developed by the Park Service and released by us is inaccurate, they need to read it and understand the problems that they've created for the Park Service with all of their policies. And so the great news about all of this, Kurt, is that they can ask for an exemption for the hiring freeze from OMB. Nothing is stopping them from doing it. They did it for the seasonals. They can do it for permanent staff. The consolidation that they did, where they took 1,600 Park Service staff and put them over in DOI, they can reverse that and put those HR staff and public information officers, contracting staff back to work. And they can also say that they're not going to do a reduction in force. These are all things that are within their power that they could decide to do tomorrow if they wanted to, and send the public a good message about caring about our parks.
Well, don't you think a lot of these are self-inflicted decisions because, the president came out with his proposed fiscal 26 budget proposal that wanted to take $1 billion away from the park system, Park Service, and as which NPCA has reported would cover about 300 units of the park system that would have to be cast aside one way or another. Do you think that they're intentionally starving the Park Service to get Congress to say, yeah, you're right, we can't afford all these places, we're going to have to get rid of them somehow, some way?
It's possible. It's possible that that's what their intent was. I think the reality is that members of Congress love the national parks that are in their areas and their districts, and they fight for them, whether they're small or large. And I think what they rapidly found out when they put out that $1 billion cut is that the public will not stand for getting rid of 350 National Park Service units. And I also think that when Secretary Burgum said that he only was going to focus on the crown jewels, the 63 NP national parks, that was also highly rejected. I sat around and wondered about that. I wondered, does he know the National Mall is not an NP national park? Does he know the Statue of Liberty is not an NP national park? Or Lake Mead? Or Blue Ridge Parkway? Or any number of other park units that are highly visited that don't have an NP national park at the end of their name? It just has not been clear to me, Kurt, that the folks over at Interior actually understand the 433 units of the National Park System and how highly regarded they are and how loved they are. And so I think their budget proposal ended up being a wake-up call for them. And they quickly found out how unpopular that idea is. And then I think when they heard from gateway communities and the recreation industry that the parks contribute $55 billion to the national economy, I think that was a learning experience for some of these DOI people. And so it is not clear to me that they have a real fundamental understanding of the parks, their contributions to the country, and the popularity that they have and how much they contribute to the economy and how much these local gateway communities depend on them. I mean, folks focus so much on rural economies right now and wanting to benefit rural economies. The parks absolutely contribute a phenomenal amount of money to rural economies. So if you care as much as you say you do, you wouldn't touch the parks.
We're almost 9 months into President Trump's second term, and we have yet to hear a nomination for a Park Service director. We've seen nominations for Forest Service director, I believe, for the BLM, although she withdrew her nomination. Why don't you think we've seen one for the Park Service? Is it because President Trump skated through his first term with acting directors and he thought that's just the way to go, or that he can't find anybody who wants to be the Park Service director under these situations?
They are interviewing someone right now for Park Service director. It's a state director of a state park system. So we'll hopefully find out soon if she progresses in getting the nomination. So, but they have been interviewing someone.
Do you think if they had somebody who eventually was confirmed by the Senate, that individual would be able to put the brakes on what's happening to the Park Service and the park system?
It just depends on the person, right? It depends on whether or not they're in agreement with the current plan or not. And so I think if this person wants to get the votes in the Senate to make it through their nomination, they're going to have to make a lot of promises to senators not to touch parks. So I think it'll be a very interesting process. A lot of times these nominees make it through early on in the year because no one really knows them and policies haven't really come out. But now that we're in September and the damage has been done, my guess is the senators won't let any nominee, they won't promise to vote for anyone unless they make a lot of promises about protecting the parks.
Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of nominees come before the Senate this year make promises that they wouldn't do this, that they wouldn't do that, and they've gone ahead and done them once they were confirmed. But that's an aside. The Great American Outdoors Act that President Trump signed towards the end of his first term has done incredible benefits for the park system and other public lands agencies, which have been given billions of dollars to help catch up with backlog maintenance. That legislation goes away at the end of this year. There's an effort in the Senate so far. I don't know if there's a companion legislation in the House, maybe you do, to revive the Great American Outdoors Act with a different name, but with the same purpose and with more money on an annual basis. Unfortunately, we're recording this podcast before a House Natural Resources Committee hearing in Jackson towards the end of this past week. What's your gut telling you? Is there a lot of support for this new legislation and a lot of desire to keep catching up with the backlog maintenance?
Yeah. In fact, I think we have 24 co-sponsors, completely bipartisan in the Senate right now. And folks see so many assets within the Park Service getting fixed and know that there's great benefit. So some of the great examples of the money being spent are roads and bridges throughout the parks. Yellowstone is a great example. Lewis River Bridge, Yellowstone River Bridge. We have historic sites like Hot Springs, where the bathhouses are getting fixed, the Jefferson Memorial getting fixed, Independence Hall getting fixed. So many visible examples of the money working throughout the park system. I think the other sort of neat thing, even though it's not national parks, are the amount of campsites and even bathrooms getting fixed on BLM and Forest Service lands. So people are entering these public lands and seeing improvements in the facilities and the roads and seeing their money being put to work. I think the other neat thing is these maintenance action teams that have been going into wildlife refuges and parks and fixing smaller issues. People are seeing a difference, and they see that we're making this massive investment and want to keep it going. And we know that there's still billions and billions of dollars of maintenance that need to continue in order to get more parks and public lands in better condition. It's been about 60 or more years since we've had a real facility upgrade in a lot of these places. So getting a refresh has been nice for visitors. Two of the biggest campgrounds in the entire park system are getting fixed, Tuolumne Meadows and the campsite at Zion, where it's just going to be much nicer to go there and to camp out there. So I think folks see that it's working, and the Senate's enthusiastically moving the bill forward. The House side continues to demonstrate that they have bipartisan support for moving forward with more funding for deferred maintenance projects. We know that they're working on a bill, and we know they want to move it this fall. And we're hoping that we can try to move both the House and Senate side early next year to re-inject billions of dollars back into these projects. And so NPCA is an enthusiastic leader on moving the bills forward and making sure the parks get more money. And I think, Kurt, this is an instance where the Interior Department, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Park Service have all done an exceptional job at administering the program. They're moving these projects at a rapid pace. About 30% of the projects that they've initiated are complete or near completion. This is quite a feat, and we should be encouraging more of them.
Grand Canyon Lodge. Does that throw a wrench into the system? Because it was a huge loss. It's going to take an amazing amount of money to rebuild that facility. And how long will that take? What approach will be taken towards it? Have you heard anything? I mean, there, the call for let the North Rim rewild itself. Forget about putting lodging in there. Of course, there's the other side that wants it rebuilt. I think Interior Department officials have already told Grand Canyon officials they will rebuild it. That's got to be an expensive project.
Yeah, it's going to be expensive. You know, when these disasters happen, the price tags are so enormous. The road in Yellowstone, after it was flooded, we knew that was going to be expensive. Congress came to the rescue and provided funding for that. Blue Ridge Parkway, Great Smokies, so many of these parks have had disaster oriented problems. And so we're hoping that the North Rim of the Grand Canyon gets disaster funding and not just Great American Outdoors Act funding. But we'll wait and see what the price tag is. We don't know yet. I don't even think the fire is completely out yet. I think it was at 80% earlier this week. So we'll have to see exactly what makes sense. But remember, the water system at Grand Canyon originates at the North Rim and goes to the South Rim. So there will have to be some serious look at the infrastructure on the North Rim and to make sure that it's up to par and up to speed to ensure it's also serving the South Rim. So there are a lot of considerations to make with the North Rim right now.
And then I think you have to consider Big Bend National Park. They were supposed to move forward this summer with building a new lodge in the Chisos Basin. That's been put off a year. The Park Service made it sound like we're going to put it off a year so visitors can enjoy the park. I'm wondering if it wasn't put off for a year because they couldn't get a contractor to bid on the project or come to terms on the cost of it.
I don't know what the story is with Chisos Basin. I was out there 2 years ago and witnessed the need for repair out there. And at the time, they were fixing some of the bathrooms in the area. So we all know it needs to be fixed. It's a high priority to get it fixed. I don't know what the limitations are right now for it, but it's been on the list.
It has been on the list, and I'll be curious to see which moves faster, the North Rim Lodge or the Chisos Basin Lodge. You know, Kristen, before I let you go, I'm curious about the announcement for this House Natural Resources Committee hearing in Jackson this past week. It talked about the need to examine opportunities to reauthorize and reform the Great American Outdoors Act. Okay, I get that. But to create new outdoor recreation opportunities at our national parks. Any idea what that meant?
So much of the money is being spent on facilities that would enhance recreation. And so There are docks getting fixed in parks and wildlife refuges. There are trails, so many hundreds of miles of trails being fixed and improved. Saratoga Battlefield, all new, much better trails being put in. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, all of those trails within the cave system were in really bad condition and didn't have handrails through it. So all of these things are classified as recreation.
But are they classified as new recreational opportunities? That's what I weren't raising an eyebrow over.
Yeah, I mean, like, I wouldn't read too much into it at this point. The bill is meant to fix deferred maintenance issues. And so, even with the bridges being fixed in Yellowstone, they are adding parking there for people to launch and go hiking, and they're adding overlooks, and they're adding all sorts of things to the ongoing projects that are happening. So it has to be attached to deferred maintenance. So there's room in the bill to add amenities, but I wouldn't read too much into it right now. So quite honestly, if you want to focus on the recreational side of things, the Explore Act would be the bill to look at in terms of implementation and how they move forward on that. I'm always concerned, as you know, about mapping and how that affects ecosystems. And so I'm watching a lot of things right now that are going on at Interior to make sure that we're protecting the very resources these places are intended to preserve. So yeah, let's keep an eye on all of this stuff. But I think because the Great American Outdoors Act Legacy Restoration Fund is intended for deferred maintenance, there's so much work to do there that adding more facilities may not make sense right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, it seems that at the end of a calendar year, there's a catch-all bill that moves through Congress to try and address things like, disaster funding for the parks, Grand Canyon Lodge. And it seems to pick up some interesting legislation from different Congress folk on what they want to see. Have you heard of any of those bills lining up?
No, not yet.
Okay. Just curious. We'll wait till the end of the year and see what pops up.
Yeah, we'll see what happens as all the natural disasters persist.
Well, hurricane season has been pretty gentle on the national park system so far.
Yeah, never know. There's been a lot of flooding too, so a lot of need that still exists out there.
Yeah, whole new climate paradigm that we have to deal with.
Yep.
Well, Kristen, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be talking down the road about parks and the Park Service.
Thanks, Kurt.
That's our show for this week. I hope you found it informative. As we get closer to the end of the month, we'll let you know what your options will be for visiting the National Park System this fall. Watch for that news at nationalparkstraveler.org. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repanshek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.